Welcome to the discussion video on accounting for corporate liquidation and reorganization. So this is the second part of the discussion. So before we discuss the statement of affairs and the corporate liquidation definition, and we have refined how corporate liquidation is differentiated with partnership liquidation. So when we prepare statement of affairs, we look at the financial position of the liquidating entity as of the date of the final liquidation. Um, However, because the liquidation process may be longer and it will take periods of time, we need to prepare a statement of realization and liquidation for us to make a progress report on the liquidation process. So, ang piniprepare natin on statement of realization and liquidation is the assets, the liabilities, and the other supplementary expenses and income arising during the period of liquidation. So, before we proceed with the actual computation, let us first familiarize with the definition of the terms used in the statement of realization and liquidation. So before that, the most common reason why we prepare the statement of realization and liquidation is because the entity has been entrusted to a receiver. So itong receiver or trustee will be responsible in winding up the affairs of the liquidating entity or the corporation in this case. So, anong ginagawa niya? The one who is responsible in monitoring the assets, in paying the liabilities, and then eventually distributing the cash available to the shareholders. So, the debits will be on the presentation of the statement of realization and liquidation ay para siyang T account. Uh, The debits will be the assets to be realized, the assets acquired, liabilities liquidated, liabilities not liquidated, and supplementary expenses. The credits are the assets realized, assets not realized, liabilities liquidated, liabilities assumed, and the supplementary income. So let us take a look at this one by one. When we look at assets to be realized, this represents the total non-cash assets available for disposal at the beginning of the period. This is measured at book value or the carrying amount. So, ibig sabihin, ito yung mga assets na hindi cash. Lahat ng assets na hindi cash. So, ito yung mga non-cash assets na eventually ay ibebenta or i-realize natin, di ba? When we say realize, the conversion of non-cash assets into cash. Second, yung assets acquired, this will be the unrecorded assets that were recognized only during the period. So, ibig sabihin, nagkaroon ka ng asset during the period of liquidation. So, yun yung tinatawag nating assets acquired. Kasi yung manggagaling, di ba, from the liquidating entity to the receiver or the trustee, yung mga ngalaga doon sa mga assets and liabilities, siya ang magmo-monitor ng payments, that will form part of the assets to be realized. Pero yung mga assets na ma-acquire mo during the period will be classified as assets acquired for easy monitoring. Next, the assets realized is a credit because these are the proceeds of the non-cash assets sold during the period. Next, assets not realized, these are the non-cash assets naman na hindi nabenta at the end of the period, which is measured at the book values. Next, the liability. So you can take a look at the T account for the items we discussed. Yung beginning, the assets to be realized, excluding the cash dahil hindi naman nire-realize yon. Additions is the assets acquired, then disposals, the assets realized. So the ending will be the assets that are not realized. Okay? Next, liabilities to be liquidated. This represents the total liabilities to be settled at the beginning of the period. So, ito yung mga babayaran natin. Liabilities assumed, parang assets acquired lang ito. Ito naman yung mga liabilities na hindi kasama doon sa binigay sa receiver pero eventually ay na-incur during the liquidation period. Liabilities liquidated, ito yung mga binayaran na nating liabilities. na part noong liabilities to be liquidated at the beginning. The ending balance will be the liabilities not liquidated. Ito yung mga hindi natin nabayaran at the end of the period measured at book value. So, tingnan mo yung summary niya. The beginning, dahil ang normal balance ng liability is credit, the beginning is under credit. Liabilities to be liquidated. Additions, yung mga liabilities na na-assume natin, yung na-incur lang during the liquidation period. Ibawas mo yung liquidated natin, liabilities liquidated, will be your liabilities not liquidated. Okay. Supplementary expenses or income, lahat lang po ng expenses or income na na-realize or na-incur during the liquidation period. Okay? Assets and liabilities transferred to the receiver are presented separately from newly acquired assets or assumed liabilities in order to highlight the receiver or trustee's accountability. Actual amounts received or paid on the sale of the assets or the settlement of are also presented. So, kailangan ipakita kasi separately yung mga assume na liabilities during the period at saka yung mga na-acquire na assets during the period. So, separate doon sa na-receive from the liquidating entity. Okay, let's take a look at the illustration. The illustration gives you the financial position of ABC company. So, ito siya. Assets at 3.7 million and liabilities and equity at 3.7 million. So, same, alam ko parang same example na ginamit natin on our previous discussion video. The additional information, 10,000 interest is receivable on the note and 15,000 interest is payable on the loan. Administrative expenses of 30,000 are expected to be incurred in the liquidation process. Okay. Since the problem says that a receiver or trustee will administer the liquidation of ABC's financial condition here, wherein in most cases yung corporate liquidation, in most cases, the corporate liquidation follows a receivership agreement. Kumbaga, yung liquidating entity, meron siyang receiver or trustee na mag-a-administer na lang ng buong winding up affairs, yung liquidation process niya. So therefore, sa books ng receiver or you note the receiver as parang ito yung mag-a-administer lang. Kumbaga temporary yung responsibility niya na isang company ito na mag-administer ng liquidation process ng company ng liquidating entity. So paano ang recognition nun sa books ng receiver? Since you are a receiver or trustee of the assets and the liabilities of this liquidating entity, you have to recognize the transfer of custody over the assets and liabilities of the liquidating entity. So how do you recognize? You recognize it at its book values. Papaano? I-debit mo lang lahat ng assets and then i-credit mo lahat ng liabilities and then kung ano man yung differences, you have to recognize a estate deficit or estate equity account. So kung mas mataas yung amounts ng iyong ang amounts ng iyong liability sa iyong assets, meron kang estate deficit. Pero kung mas marami ang assets mo kaysa sa iyong liabilities, meron kang estate equity. Okay? So dito pa lang sa financial position, makikita mo na meron kang capital deficiency. So therefore, meron kang estate deficit. So i-debit mo lahat ng assets and then i-credit mo lahat ng liabilities and then kung ano yung balancing figure will be your estate deficit and estate equity. Okay, the receiver records the assets and liabilities at book values rather than the realizable values and expected net settlement amounts. The unrecorded interests are not included in the opening entry above. These are recorded separately and identified as new assets and liabilities as follows dun sa susunod na slide or na page nito. Okay, so why do we record the transaction as at book values. Kasi, tinatransfer pa lang naman yung amounts, yung carrying amounts or book values ng liquidating entity sa receiver. So, it is but proper to recognize it at fair value, at book value muna. So, i-recognize mo muna yan kasi tinatransfer mo pa lang naman sa books ng receiver yung lahat ng amounts na nasa financial position mo. So, it is but proper to recognize it at carrying amounts nung tinransfer mo siya. Okay? Yung additional information, anong gagawin doon? May interest daw na 10,000 and 15,000 sa receivable tsaka liability, tas may admin expenses dyan. It is not part of the transferred amounts to the books of the receiver because it will be recorded as a new asset and liability kasi ang ang recognition nito ay nangyari yung interest and receivable at after the time that the company decides to liquidate. So, yung interest will be a new entry and it is not included dun sa opening entry sa receiver book. So, paano natin i-recognize yung interest, receivable, and then administrative expenses na 30,000? Let us take a look. So, therefore, dahil ganun yung situation, you have to recognize it, interest receivable, new, 10,000, and then, credit mo na kaagad sa estate deficit. Kumbaga, bawasan mo yung estate deficit. Dahil may liability ka naman, you credit interest payable, 15,000, and then idagdag mo naman sa estate deficit. Remember, ang pinag-uusapan natin dito is a liquidating entity. Kaya ikino-close out mo kaagad doon sa estate deficit yung mga ganitong, yung mga assets, yung assets acquired, tsaka new liabilities assumed. So, the estimated administrative expenses naman, ano natin gagawin natin dyan? Since the additional info says that the admin expense are expected to be incurred in the liquidation process at yung asset accounts and liabilities ay nasa receiver na. Therefore, hindi mo na muna yan dapat i-recognize dahil i-recognize mo na lang yan kapag actually nabayaran na. At the point of view of the receiver, ganun yung orientation regarding the expected administrative expenses. So, hindi mo yan i-record ngayon, i-record mo lang yan kapag yan ay binayaran na talaga. So, for this instance, i-ignore mo na lang muna yung admin expense na 30 na naka-indicate doon. Okay? The actual liquidation costs and gains and losses are subsequently recorded directly to the estate account, and if this account has a debit balance, it is referred as estate deficit, and if it has a credit, estate equity. Okay. So let us take a look. A statement of at the how we journalize the transaction. Ito yung nasa point of view ka na ng receiver. Nasa receiver na lahat ng assets and liabilities, tapos ito yung mga additional information. Okay, the following transactions occurred during the period A. Only 165,000 were collected on the AR. The remainder was written off. So, at the point of view of the receiver, how do you recognize it? You debit cash, 165,000 for the collection, debit estate deficit 55,000, and then credit accounts receivable. Magkano ang accounts receivable mo ba? Based on the transferred amount, 220. So, 220 minus 165 ay 55,000. So, merong estate deficit doon. So, directly na, 'di ba ang sabi diyan, directly i-record mo na yaan sa, 'di ba sabi, actual liquidation costs and gains or losses are subsequently recorded directly to the estate account. So, estate deficit yan kasi ay debit yung balancing figure. Okay, letter B. The interest on the note was collected in full but only 90% was collected on the principal and the remainder was written off. So, magkano ang nakolekta daw? Yung note na kolekta daw in full, the interest is collected in full pero 90% ng principal. So, debit cash, 10,000 plus the 90% of 100,000 is 100,000. So, cash 100,000, then i-credit mo yung note receivable mo 100,000, and then credit interest receivable 10,000. Yan ba yung amount dito? Note receivable 100,000. Okay. Yung interest receivable na sinasabi dito, ito yon, yung ni-recognize mo dito sa additional information. And then, since the balancing figure is debit, debit ka ng estate deficit. Next, half of the inventory was sold for 300,000. Actual cost to sell for 5,000. So, debit cash ka, magkano ba yung sale price? 300,000 minus 5,000, cost to sell is 295,000. Then, credit ka ng inventory, 265. Kasi, magkano ba yung inventory natin? 530. Okay, yung kalahati niyan ay magkano? 265,000. Then, estate deficit ka 30,000. So, papapansin mo, estate deficit yung ginagamit because you already recognize estate deficit on the beginning. So, parang dinadagdag at binabawasan mo na lang siya. Letter D, the prepaid assets were written off. So ni-write off lang yung prepaid assets. So, debit, estate deficit, credit, prepaid assets, 10,000. Letter E, the land and building were sold for 2.6 million. So, cash, 2.6. Credit ka ng land, 500. Ito yung value ng land, 500, tsaka 2 million. Tama, 502 million. And then, estate deficit, 100,000. Letter F, the equipment was sold for 220, debit cash 220, credit 300,000. So yung balancing figure, estate deficit 80,000. Letter G, of the total accrued expenses, only the accrued salaries were paid and the remaining balance remains outstanding. So debit accrued expenses, credit cash 25,000. Letter H, the current tax payable was paid in full. Magkano ba yung tax payable? 350. Current tax payable, credit cash 350. Letter I, interest and the principal on the loan were paid in full. So, interest payable, 15,000. Loan payable, 2 million. Naka-debit yan. And then, binayaran lahat, 2,015,000 cash. J, the note payable was settled for 220. The lender canceled the balance. The note payable was settled for 220. Magkano ba yung note payable? 300,000. So, credit ka ng note payable, debit ka ng note payable, 300,000, credit ka ng cash, 220,000, and then credit ka ng estate deficit, 80,000 for the balancing figure. Letter K, admin expenses were paid, 27,000. So, ito yung sinasabi natin kanina. Kung kailan lang siya binayaran, doon mo i-recognize. So, debit estate deficit, 27,000, and then credit cash, 27,000. Okay, let us take a look at the notes. The amounts to be presented in the statement of realization and liquidation are identified as follows. Diba? The assets to be realized. So, ito yung assets to be realized. So, matatandaan mo, kapag assets to be realized, lahat lang ng non-cash ito. Lahat lang ng non-cash. Kaya siya 3,660,000 because 3.7 yung total asset less mo yung 40,000 cash. Okay? The assets acquired is 10,000. Ano ba yung assets acquired? Di ba lahat ito ay tinransfer, pero yung ano yung na-acquire mo na asset, yung after na itong receivable, interest receivable na 10,000. So 10,000 ang yung assets acquired. Yung unrecorded interest receivable. The assets realized are equal to the actual net proceeds. Kung magkano lang yung pinagbentahan ng lahat ng non-cash assets, yun po yung total ng assets realized. Assets not realized, edi i-add, how do you recognize it? Asset to be realized, 3,660,000 plus 10,000 na assets acquired minus yung assets realized, then yung assets not realized is 265. Okay? Or, easily, makikita mo naman on the additional information na yun yung unsold inventory. So, 530 times 50%. Okay? The liabilities to be liquidated is 3,871,000. Saan nakuha yun? Andyan lang yun sa financial position, 3,817. Tama ba? Is it 3,817? Liabilities to be liquidated. 3,871. Mali lang ba itong item na ito? Yes. I think there is an error on this. Dapat ito ay 3,871. I-total nga natin. 221 plus 350 plus 1,000,000 plus 300 plus 2,000,000. 3,871,000. So, pakipalitan ito. 3,871,000, hindi 3,870,000. Okay? So, yan po yung liabilities to be liquidated kasi yan yung babayaran mo sa liquidation process, after the liquidation process. 3,871. Okay? Liabilities assumed yung 15,000 na interest payable na nasa additional information. Liabilities liquidated, yung total po na binayaran natin, yung actual payment. Then, liabilities to be liquidated. So, ito yung liabilities not liquidated. This is liabilities not liquidated. It is not to be liquidated. Yung, ano ito? Liabilities not liquidated. 1,196,000. This is the accrued expenses. Na 221 minus 25,000 is 196 plus 1,000,000 liabilities to be liquidated. Or pwedeng liabilities to be liquidated plus liabilities assumed minus liabilities liquidated is yung liabilities not liquidated. Okay? Supplementary expenses, ito yung administrative expenses na 27,000. There's no supplementary income during the period. Okay? So you just have to present it using the T account na pinresent sa iyo, yung template na pinresent sa iyo before. Asan 'yun? Ito, yung mga T account related to assets realized, the assets that realized. So pag sama-samahin sa isang T account for you to analyze whether there is a net gain or a net loss on the transaction. So, assets to be realized, assets acquired, liabilities liquidated, liabilities not liquidated, supplementary expenses. Then, i-compare natin sa credits, assets realized, assets not realized, liabilities to be liquidated, liabilities assumed, supplementary income. Okay. You take a look at this. The credits is greater than the debit. So, ibig sabihin, meron kang net gain dyan. Kasi mas marami yung amounts na nabentang assets at kakonti yung liabilities na assume and na liquidate. So therefore, when the credits is greater than the debits, when you plot these items, it will generate a net gain, di ba? Net gain siya ng 28,000. The excess of the credit and the debit. So let us now proceed with formally setting up the statement of realization and liquidation. So ganito lang yung pag-state niyan. So para siyang T account. Assets to be realized. So i-itemize mo lahat yung 3.66 million na kinumpit natin before. Assets realized yung 3.38. Ito yun, di ba? Assets acquired, ito. Assets not realized, 265. Then the liabilities liquidated, so 2.610. Liabilities to be liquidated, kina-compute natin, ito yung given sa problem, 3,871. Liabilities not liquidated, so ito. Liabilities assumed, 15,000. So, ganyan yung pag-present ng statement of realization and liquidation. Okay. Let us, the supplementary items, sa supplementary expenses, meron tayong 27,000. The net gain during the period is 28,000. So, 7,531,000 ang total niyan dapat. So, pag tinotal mo ito, tsaka iyon, yun yung magiging balance niya. So, let us first analyze the transaction. Yung, i-analyze natin yung lumabas na 28,000 na net gain kung saan siya nanggaling. 'Di ba? Punta tayo sa non-cash assets. The assets to be realized, 'di ba? Ang sabi, how do we compute for the transactions related to non-cash assets? Yung assets to be realized mo, 3.66, 'di ba? Assets acquired mo 10,000. So 3,670,000 ang total ng assets na dapat mong ibenta, tapos yung assets na na-acquire mo pa. I-minus mo yung assets realized. The assets realized is 3,380,000. Then the assets not realized is 265,000. Kasi, when you total yung assets realized and assets not realized based on the computation on the previous slide, 3,645,000. Therefore, may excess. Dahil mas mataas itong debit kaysa sa credit, meron kang net loss on the sale of the non-cash asset, 25,000. So, pwedeng ito kasi ang itanong sa'yo uh, when you are answering multiple choice problems or sipale, pwedeng yan ang itanong, the net loss on the sale or the net gain on the sale of the non-cash assets. So, sa liabilities naman, ito tayo magsimula sa liabilities to be liquidated plus liabilities assumed. So yan yung credits mo. Ang debits mo, yung liabilities mo na na-liquidate at saka yung not liquidated. So, meron kang net gain on settlement na 80,000 kasi mas malaki naman yung nasa credit mo. Remember, we are looking at liabilities. Sa supplementary expenses, merong loss na kasi naging expenses lang walang income. So, supplementary items. So, 27,000 ang loss. So, when you analyze this, the net loss on the sale plus the net gain on the settlement minus the net yung expenses, you will be arriving at the net gain of 28,000. So that's how you analyze yung kung paano natin i-analyze yung transactions related to the computation of the balances of the net loss and the net gain on the realization of the assets, the liquidation of liabilities and other supplementary items. So on this next page, this will just kung kanina breakdown natin using the non-cash liabilities and supplementary items, we can also break down it using the assets. All the assets, all the liabilities, kumbaga per account basis siya. So you should be arriving at the same analysis or breakdown. Dahil bine-breakdown mo lang, you should be arriving at the net gain pa rin na 28,000. Okay, you can also look at the ending balance of cash by analyzing the beginning balance of cash, 40, plus the assets realized, kasi ito yung mga nabentang assets. So, ibig sabihin, ito na yung total cash mo, minus yung mga binayaran mong liabilities, minus yung binayaran mong expenses. So, the ending balance of cash is at 783,000. So, that's how you analyze. Same is true with the ending balance of the estate equity or deficit account. Madali lang naman ito because you will just only look at the journal entries and then you recognize kung magkano magiging ending balance ng estate or deficit equity accounts. Okay, I think that ends the discussion on the second part of the corporate liquidation. So let us look at this muna, yung reconciliation of cash using the accounting equation assets is equal to liabilities plus equity. So yung cash mo ay because ang sabi dito, this recon can be useful when answering CPA board exam questions. So let us take a look at this because you may use this template when you are analyzing transactions. Your cash is 783,000. The assets not realized is 265,000. So ito yung total asset na natira sa'yo. 783 kasi nabenta yung ibang assets pero yung hindi nabenta, 265. So total, 1,048,000. Sa liabilities and equity portion naman, yung liabilities na hindi na-liquidate ay 1,196. Magkano ba ang estate deficit na na-compute mo on the previous 148,000? So, ang total, 1,048,000. So, this should be balanced. So, bakit sinabing pwede mo itong magamit using the CPA board exam? Because, merong mga problems doon na pwedeng sabihin na ito yung estate deficit. Tapos, binigay lang sa iyo yung cash and assets not realized. So, pwedeng ang itanong sa iyo dyan, how much is the liabilities not liquidated? So, pwedeng i-squeeze yung mga items dyan. Pwede namang ibigay sa iyo liabilities not liquidated, tapos estate deficit, tapos assets not realized. Ang tatanungin sa iyo yung cash. Kaya may mga arrow dyan. So pwedeng dito ka mag-start, then compute 1,048,000, then i-extend mo yon dahil binigay sa'yo assets not realized, you compute for your cash. So, ganun siya. Pwedeng ganun ang tenor ng questioning the CPA board exam. So, you have to familiarize with this concept para baka ma-overwhelm ka, parang kulang yung information, but actually you are tested on how do you really understand the concept of corporate liquidation. So I think I have to end the discussion for the second part of this corporate liquidation video. Thank you.